All right, we're broadcasting. We're gonna let people trickle in here while Zeb and we you and I have like the same uniform on, which is like untucked dress shirt with shorts.
It's 90 degrees today. You got to be wearing it. It's also both checked.
Oh,
I
nice.
went up
Where are
one
you?
extra button. Maybe I'll go down.
Oh no, you gotta like keep it flowing. Where are you? Where are you living now? Are you in SF? Or are you in
So
the peninsula?
neither one. We made a great decision to take advantage of the very short-lived decline in the Airbnb market. So we moved to Montana for the summer. And we got a
No.
place that's normally like 250 a day for like 80 bucks a night or something. It ended up being
Oh
way
wow.
cheaper than living in the Bay Area. So we did the
So
Montana summer, and then we
you're in Montana. That's crazy. One of my reps is in Jackson Hole right now. I mean, he's from Jackson Hole, but he is just like absolutely loving it.
we actually just came back, so we got a place in Oakland on 30th Street. But we did spend the whole summer out there, and it was a
Delightful.
strong decision. Yeah.
Do they have internet in Montana?
Yeah, so that was the challenge was satellite internet.
What?
Uh,
No.
have you ever used satellite internet?
I imagine it's like as bad as a satellite phone.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing I didn't realize about it, so I ran my like speed check and my ping was 700 to 850 milliseconds, which
Right. So the
means,
latency is bad, right?
and that's in each direction. So basically for me to say something and then you to say something back, it adds a second and a half of pause to every conversation you have, which
Wow.
is the worst thing you could imagine in like a presentation or something. I was running enablement sessions in the middle of this and like ended up having to drive to town to sit in a car on a hotspot just to be able to like
Oh my God.
effectively communicate.
Yeah, that's crazy. All right. Well, maybe we can get started here as people are kind of are trickling in. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for Sales Strategy Office Hours. We got an awesome guest here today, Mr. Zeb Hermann. Super stoked to have him here. You'll have a little bit more about him in a second. For folks who haven't been to Sales Strategy Office Hours before, this is a modern sales production. So I'm Pete Kazanji. I'm one of the founders of Modern Sales, the nation's largest sales operations enablement leadership peer education community. And so what kind of inspired Sales Strategy Office Hours is I have a tendency to talk with a lot of sales leaders, sales operations folks. Hey, Pete, I want to pick your brain on XYZ. Hey, Pete, I want to pick your brain on XYZ. And so kind of realized that doing it one-off and kind of like, synchronously like that was maybe not the most efficient thing in the world. And moreover, it wasn't like benefiting other people who could like benefit from the topics being discussed. So that's where Sales Strategy Office Hours came from. We're going to cover five to eight topics here across the coming hour from folks who are joining us. We'll promote people from the audience to come and do ask their question live with our expert here. So with that, I would love for Zeb to introduce himself. Zeb, you want to give folks a background on you?
Yeah, I'll do the 30-second version. So I started in sales probably 8 years ago. Then 5 years ago, I moved to a company called Segment as a sales rep for about 2.5 months, where I just got incredibly fed up with our terrible CRM implementation and lack of data and just like general lack of sophistication. And so I moved from that into a sales ops role. I stayed at Segment for 4 years, eventually leading sales strategy, sales enablement, and sales tools. Um, about a year ago, Sequoia asked me to come join their team, and I work for Sequoia in a interesting like internal external sales ops role. So I both support our portfolio companies, especially early stage ones that are just figuring out how to set things up, and I support our investment team, making them more efficient and more effective.
Which I think is like my favorite because, if anybody follows me on Twitter, I'm absolutely obnoxious. And I have some tweet from like 3 years ago where I say something along the lines of like the first venture fund that puts like a mean sales operations person in charge of their investors will just like kick ass on everybody else because they'll actually do their work and they'll actually like be CRM excellent and what have you. And so like lo and behold, now you have a mean sales actually that's very nice. A mean sales operations person who's making people march in a line. So that's absolutely fantastic. And I'm sure obviously Sequoia Capital needs very little introduction, multi-stage investors, invest in consumer enterprise, et cetera, et cetera. Were they segment investors?
No. And they actually have an interesting thing they do where they like to hire from companies that they weren't investors in, but they wish they were.
Yeah.
So I was the segment person they brought on board because they were basically upset that they made the wrong decision a bunch of times.
That's like super intellectually honest. That's very Sequoia. It's very intellectually honest, whereas a lot of organizations are like, oh, well, like, we're comfortable with, people from our portfolio companies over here. And it's like, well, that portfolio company was like the, fourth laggard in that industry. So that's fantastic. Okay, cool. So I'm Pete Kazanji. A little bit about me. As I noted, I started Modern Sales. I also happen to be one of the founders of Atrium. We make sales performance analysis software that does the analysis for you. So continuously monitors performance metrics for AEs, SDRs, AMs, CSMs, and alerts managers, operations, and leadership to things of interest, whether it's like something really bad with a rep or something maybe really great with a rep that you could broadcast to other folks in the organization. So one of the ways we like to describe it, it's like, imagine if you had a little robot army of like miniature Zebs. It would be great, right? But at software prices instead of like, Zeb prices, like 10 Zeb prices. Prior to Atrium, I started a recruiting software company called Talent Bin that was acquired by Monster in 2014. That's really where I learned modern sales, because my background's in product management and product marketing. Didn't know anything about sales when I started Talent Bin, and kind of like learned on the job. Ended up writing a book on sales for founders and startup sales called Founding Sales as a result of all of the mistakes that I made while doing that at Talent Bin. So that's a little bit on me. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and get into this here. So just like a little bit of a reminder on rules and process. Go ahead and ask your questions in the chat room here. Your thorniest sales strategy, sales operations, sales management, whatever. Like, we're pretty expert at this stuff, and if not, we'll just make something up for you. We're going to go ahead and we'll find questions that look interesting, and we'll go ahead and pull you out of the audience. You'll come and join us. So it's very much like Car Talk or Love Line or what have you, but for sales nerdery, right? So and we'll keep it moving every 5 to 8 minutes. We like to move on to a new question. So that is the deal there. And so without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and grab somebody out of the audience here. Oh yeah, Sai had a really great question. He brought it in. He submitted it ahead of time. So I'm going to go ahead and promote Sai here. Let me see if that shows up.
Oh, hey guys.
Hey, Sai, what's shaking? How you doing?
Good, good. How's everyone doing?
Wonderful. So wow, I just love how organized your shelves are. That is absolutely delightful. It's giving me like an OCD spike. Cool. So can you go ahead and introduce yourself, where you work, kind of describe your sales motion a little bit, like where you sell to, kind of like ASP, et cetera, and then we can get into your questions. Your question, singular.
Yep,
okay.
yep. Sounds good. Yeah. So my name is Sai. I actually not exactly in sales ops. I'm actually in business operations at Intercom. And our ASP, our go-to-market motion is more on the trial buy kind of experience. So
Sure.
A little bit on the lower end, but we are going up market from that perspective. ASP is hovering around 10K plus. So the question I have, and it's actually, I don't think it's specific to Intercom. It's just something that I'm generally curious about, because I do think folks have varying stages, or at varying stages, and they inevitably come to this question of going up market.
Sure.
So the question I have for Zeb is, what are some of the biggest misconceptions regarding going up market? Forcing more inbound prospects to talk to sales, is that one approach, or is it really like double downing on outbound are the solutions?
Got it.
Yeah,
So biggest problems, biggest misconceptions of going up market. I imagine this happened with Segment a bit.
yeah. There was actually an interesting back and forth where we started very similar to Intercom, like developer-led sale. People signed up. There's open source project. People signed up on the website, paid $100 a month or $500 a month online. Then we started having salespeople basically work that inbound channel. And then we hired a few enterprise reps that were super successful, kind of selling a vision of unified data strategy into big enterprises. Then we took a swing back where we said, enterprise sales is tough. It takes a long time. You don't really know if it's successful or not. And the amount of money you have to put into it in advance of knowing whether it's going to be successful is insane, which I think is one of the things you have to think about as you're deciding on that strategy. But the upside is when you sign those contracts, you can sign, I mean, many million dollar contracts in lots of cases that are really likely to retain, right? And so the retention you get from enterprise businesses is totally different. I think the thing that we probably could have done better is look at the two people. Actually, one of them was Raph Parker, who Pete and I were just talking about earlier. Raph Parker and Chris Surdy were our two first enterprise reps who were incredibly successful at selling this vision into all sorts of different companies, especially media and retail companies. And we could have tried to figure out what they were doing and replicated it. Instead of doing that, we hired something like 6 or 8 accomplished enterprise sales reps and had them come in and just try and figure it out themselves. And the real deficiency in that was the cost of doing that and the fact that at least half of those reps didn't succeed, right? And so next time I would be much more incremental and hire 1 or 2 people, test it out, then hire a couple more people and have them pay or figure out some sort of shared comp where people are sharing the upside of the deals that they close so that they can learn from the people who've been successful, as opposed to just throwing money at it and realizing like, oh, this is not just something that anybody can figure out. It takes like a particular process and particular skill set that we just got lucky in having 2 initial people who had the right set of skills.
Yeah, I think one of the things, so the book I wrote on startup sales, founding sales, is primarily focused on the notion of sales motion development, right? And the thesis that you can't outsource that to somebody else. A founder has to do it. It's very difficult to outsource to somebody else. One key thing that people don't realize is that as you go into different segments, or even in different segments, or different verticals, usually it's a new sales motion. And so you have to redevelop that sales motion each incremental time, right? There will be different features of it. Depending on how different it is, it may be extraordinarily different. So I think that, like, I'm actually doing this right now with Atrium. So Atrium has an extremely developed mid-market SaaS company sales motion. So we can go to an organization. Their sales performance instrumentation is very poor. A 10-person sales organization, a 30-person sales organization, a stakeholder, whether it's a sales manager or sales operations, can turn their data on very quickly. They suddenly have insight and visibility into things that they never had before, and they can transact. Cool. We're just bumping that out. Like, I have 4 reps right now. I'm hiring 3 more. We're just jamming it out. What I'm doing is I'm now moving on to into enterprise land, where I'm figuring out what the enterprise sales motion looks like. So that's the first thing, is like, you can't just be like, hey, the sales motion over here is going to be the same as over here. We'll just run the same playbook. And you have to develop it. The other thing I would think about too is like, is it a top-down enterprise sale, right? It's initiative-based selling. So like Segment and mParticle are the 2 big CDP players. mParticle, like the entire organization comes from a very top-down sale background. So I think you have to think about, like, is the idea here to start at the top and then drive an initiative? Because then the problem there is that your sales motion or the adoption of your product has to line up with an initiative internally. So the organization has to say like, oh yeah, we should have a unified data strategy, kind of like what Zeb was talking about, or Sai in you guys' case, and be like, yeah, we really do need some sort of chat-based, like on the support side, on the sales side, or whatever. Like that is a priority for us right now. And so, like, if that's how that's sold in an enterprise like that, then you have to realize that that's the case. Now, there's another version of this, which is if you can just be permissionlessly adopted in an organ, and this has historically been kind of like a developer sales motion, where developers will start like playing around with like New Relic or Pusher or Twilio or whatever in patches in an organization. And then now it's moved to business apps like Zoom and Slack. Or are you just kind of like collecting those? Like, oh, there's like patches of things, we're going to collect them together, and now we're going to use that as the tip of the spear to go through the rest of the organization. So I think you have to figure out which of those is the right approach there, and say like, so in Zeb's case, I think what was happening, or like the kind of error mode with Segment was there probably was like adoption within like these corporate organizations, right, here and there. And so it sounded like part of it was going at the top, which actually sounds like it worked with Raf and the other guy, right? Somewhat, but like super long burn, et cetera. So like maybe like doing this might have been potentially a more efficient approach. And then the second thing was like, Raf is like a very special breed of human where like he is kind of like an evangelical. He's a former lawyer by trade. Like he's kind of like one of those unicorns who can like innovate a sales motion, which is usually why like a founder has to do it. So in that case, it was innovated, but then it wasn't like stamped out. So I think those are things that you have to consider. Zeb, did you have more to add?
I was just going to point out that the enterprise buying motion is totally different. The maybe one exception to that is this more like bottoms up developer led sale that Pete is describing. Typically, it's going to take you half a year at least to sign a contract. Often it took a year or more to sign those contracts. And so expecting your existing sales process to just like flip over into the enterprise seems like a fool's errand. I think the other thing with enterprise sales is that enterprise sellers typically are really versed at the top down sale. And so if you have a product like yours, it's more viral and bottoms up is what I would expect your motion would look like there. You need kind of like a different breed of rep, a different type of rep. And so if you bring in the person who was like, I don't know, the best on their team at selling some global enterprise solution that was sold to the CIO and
like maybe Marketo, like,
Marketo,
let's go get enterprise reps from Marketo. They'll slay it at Intercom from bottom up.
It's a completely different motion. And so that person's going to struggle.
Yeah. The last thing to note is that the other benefit of having like that RAF run ahead, or that like evangelical kind of like product managery rep run ahead, is like you're going to run into a bunch of like missing product requirements. Oh, where's your SAML? SAML? What are you talking about? Yeah, you know, what's your GDPR CCPA? Huh? Right. So I think those are things you have to be mindful of. Wonderful. Well, Sai, thank you very much for coming and hanging out with us, and we'll see you around. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks,
Take care, man.
Thanks.
All right. Cool. Delightful. That's a great topic. People mess that up a lot. Wonderful. Okay, Boris is here. We've got a great question from Boris. Let me go ahead and grab you here. Ba-ba-bum.
Hey.
Hey, how's it going, Boris?
Not too bad, not too bad. It's sunny in San Francisco. Can't complain today.
Wonderful. Yes, my oh, you're joining us twice. Delightful. That's fine.
I am. That is
Hi,
not my intent.
Hey, Boris. Hey, Boris. Boris, doctor. How are you? So Boris, can you just introduce yourself, what your organization does, kind of like the parameters of your sales motion, and then we can get into your question?
Sure. So I run a company called Census. We help sales and RevOps and BizOps teams actually get data into all their tools, like their CRM, from the product teams, so that they can make better decisions, specifically around things like customer success and personalized engagement with their customers. Mm-hmm. And this is actually, my question is actually more one of curiosity. Our sales motion, actually, sorry, I should answer that question. Our sales motion right now is very much direct to kind of data teams and business operations teams, and we help them kind of solve this data disconnect. And our average selling price is probably in the kind of 10K range right now, but it's fairly variable still. And then this is more out of curiosity myself. Is what kinds of data, in the broadest sense of the term, are leaders missing when they're trying to make kind of yearly or quarterly or bigger kind of sales strategy decisions, right? So what are the ones that I think you two just mentioned one that it was about, you might want to build the right team before you make that decision, or that decision is tied to building the right team around it. But what are the on the ground pieces of data that people are missing when they're trying to make these kinds of decisions?
Yeah, for sure.
So-
Zeb, you guys, Segment is a data company, and you are a data person, CRM data store person. Do you have a take on this?
So yeah, my hot take on this is I think that people tend to complexify their decisions and tend to look at way too many data points instead of the like 2 or 3 that are actually important. So in general, I think most organizations have, let's say, I can't imagine a sales organization that doesn't have some conception of their win rate, right? Maybe they don't measure it accurately. Maybe it's off by a few percentage points, but they're probably going to know generally what it is. And they could probably differentiate that between inbound and outbound. And if you could look at that, you could say, is our outbound motion working or not, right? And that's like the first question I would want to answer on should we invest in more outbound is, does it work?
Yep.
So overall, I think my perspective on this is figure out the actual drivers of the business and what are the like metrics that are associated with those drivers. And there should be less than 5, preferably 1 or 2 or 3, and then measure those things really effectively. And as an example on the win rate thing, like Segment, for instance, and somebody in the chat said something about how we have all these people to prospect. If you look at our outbound win rate to companies that weren't already using our open source product or our free product, it was basically 0% for the first 5 years of the company. But that just never showed up because we were kind of calculating it wrong. We were looking at just outbound win rate as on deals that a sales rep said was an outbound deal. And everybody wants to sell outbound because it makes them look like successful, basically. Even though we didn't comp more on it, it's just like a bragging rights thing. So we calculated that metric incorrectly and made incorrect decisions based off of it. And going back, I would just calculate that correctly and then know, oh, we shouldn't be investing in outbound at all. We should be investing in this kind of like harvest or long tail of all these companies that have a few paying users or using the open source product, etc.
Yeah. I'm going to give you a framework first. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. So this is like what we like to call the hierarchy of sales performance analysis excellence. And so essentially this is like this pyramid where you get more mature as you go up. Also, the things at the top are kind of required or like rely on things like that. So like 1, you got to know what metrics to track, questions to answer, they got to collect the data. This is where things like census are really helpful. Then you got to build the reporting, you got to determine and set goals on things, and then you got to use your eyeballs in order to like monitor and identify stuff, and then root cause. And so I think what ends up, so this is like the process that you have to go through. And so one thing that there's a bunch of different pathologies that organizations will do. So one thing that they'll do is they'll try to track too many things, which is what Zeb is talking about, right? And so I think one thing to do there is, like what are the core meat and potatoes things that you actually, that like really matter? Let me go see it. Like, for example, for AEs, it's just gonna be the revenue formula. So like Zeb was talking about win rate, but it's like bookings, wins, ASP, deal cycle, win rate, at bats. Like this is first level right here. If you don't have this in place to start, and then moreover, you're not like setting goals on that and then monitoring it, well then why are you going off and like oh, I read it, I listened to some webinar where somebody told me that I needed to calculate like LTV per customer acquisition channel. It's like, dude, you don't even know how many meetings your reps are having, bro. Like, come on. So I think that's like, one is like making sure that you have the meat and potatoes executed first, and that you're actually like consuming it, because this is the challenge is that it's funny that Zeb is in a forest right now. One of the jokes I like to say is, the joke about if a tree falls in the woods and no one's around, does it make a noise? If you have a dashboard, if you have an SDR performance dashboard and no one ever looks at it, do the SDRs do any work? Right? So like you actually, like people have to be looking, or alternatively, you have to have like software that's like monitoring it, which is kind of what we do. But so that's one thing, is like have the meat and potatoes done and make sure that people are actually consuming it. Because then you can make like, usually what ends up happening is like, it's not the sexy things that are broken early on. It's things like, your reps aren't having enough meetings.
Right.
They have like, I mean, we were talking to some prospect the other day. They were trying to figure out, they're like, okay, well, one of our biggest problems right now is we're trying to figure out if we're ready to scale. And they're like, okay, cool. Well, like one of the things we would want to look at there is look at like win rates on bats, and also if your reps are fully utilized right now. We looked at how many customer facing meetings the reps were having on a week by week basis across the trailing 90 days. And it was like 5. I was like, okay, cool. So you don't need more reps right now. You just need these guys loaded up a little bit more there. And like they were potentially about to go and like make a really silly decision, like, oh, we're gonna double the size of the sales team. It's like, maybe just get a little bit more utilization out of our reps first. So I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing I would note is oftentimes where people mess this up is they use because humans suck at math, and we hate to do that, like looking at ness of these things. What we do is we get reductive. So you want like the appropriate amount of complexity. And so first you would want to have those meat and potatoes KPIs. Then the next thing I would recommend is you want to have that on a per rep basis, because what ends up happening is that you use averages and team totals, and what that can do is that essentially abstracts away where the rubber actually hits the road. So potentially if you have a 10 rep team, like, oh yeah, our win rate's fine, it's like steady state, maybe going up a little bit over time. Well, it actually might be that like 6 of your reps are getting better over time, but like 2 are totally, shit in the bed. And so that would just be completely abstracted away if you weren't looking at rep level metrics. I think the other thing, like, because you were asking about other data that's missing, so like this is like rep level stuff, and I know that like Zeb and I were talking about this ahead of the call, where our belief is that organizations are going to be going towards the more easy end, try before you buy, and like both from a first transaction standpoint and then like a customer success and like consuming more over time. And that's like where utilization information ends up being really, really important. And like understanding how users are using the software, or like using your software you're offering, and if they are consuming and getting utility out of it. And obviously that's like where things like census are extremely helpful. That's a new thing.
Right.
Like that has been like essentially segment plus census, or like segment plus like catalyst, or like catalyst from a customer success. Like segment is like the key enabling technology, or like other CDPs is key enabling technology to make it such that now you can do things like, okay, cool, like, how's this trial going? Or like my AEs have like maybe like 15 trials open at any given point in time. They're able to understand how the trial's going on the different like sales managers or sales operations people, because like they can literally see in the Salesforce contact objects like how many dashboards people are looking at, et cetera. So I think that's like a new genre of data that can be considered that helps with a sales motion. Anything else you want to add, Zeb, before
Actually, I wanted
you
to
want to ask?
push back on, or like ask like a follow up on, based on the previous question. Like you just said, you're going from, as we speak, from let's say mid market to enterprise, right? You're looking at that at that motion. What data do what are the signals, apart from the gut feel of like, let's go test out that side of the market?
Oh, changes in KPI, right? So like opportunity conversion rate on a segment basis. Another good one is like, we have a metric called follow-up meeting ratio. It's essentially how many second, third, fourth meetings you get for every first meeting. It's like how many second dates you get, and then ultimately win rate. And so like 3 years ago, or 2 years ago, when I was starting Atrium sales motion, we would measure me internally on how my conversion rate was getting better over time. Like obviously bookings is a lag on a lag on a lag. Like win rate is a lag. Opportunity conversion rate, okay, now you're getting a little bit into a lead. And then like second meetings is a pretty good lead.
That's cool.
The one thing which is a little bit outside of the wheelhouse of both of your companies, which I think are really helpful in this space generally, is just customer feedback. I think that probably the most useful things that I've seen and read, and most like tactical useful analysis, is why people purchase and why people don't, and just putting in place a like systematic interviewing of won customers and lost customers by someone other than the sales rep, because what you hear back from the team is a lot different than what you hear from the customer. And that is just like, especially on things like going into a new market, you'll hear customers say again and again, oh, it's XYZ thing, or we like GDPR was mentioned before. This is like a key concern for us, and selling to European companies, it was just a non-starter to try and sell to them without having GDPR functionality. And when you start talking to them, you talk to 5 customers, and all of a sudden it's like glaringly obvious what the gap in your process is. So
yeah, essentially what you're talking about there is like customer development, kind of like Eric Reese, Steve Blank, Michael Sippy, et cetera, but like on the new sales motion. right? Another thing you can do there, and I'm going to just go ahead and drop this into the chat here. There's also surveying software that you potentially can use for that as well. There's a company called Viable Fit that is like, is systematizing kind of like the superhuman approach to like customer surveying on like what parts of the product you do not live without, what parts do we need to make better, et cetera. Wonderful, Boris. We got to move on. Good to see you. Take care. All right. So many good things to talk about. So Dalton had a really good question here. So let's go ahead and grab Dalton, and I'll kick the ghost of Boris out here. Bye-bye, ghost of Boris.
Hi.
Hit it, bro. Dalton, what's happening?
Hey, Pete, it's been a while. How's it going?
Yeah, for sure. What's on your hat? Lean forward. Is that a...
It's a Wildcat, Tucson, University of Arizona.
Oh, delightful. Well, good to see you, dude. Can you introduce yourself to everybody, please? And oh my God, who is your friend?
This is Clementine. She's a Great Dane who I'm watching.
Oh my goodness. Hi, Clementine.
Thanks for during this call.
Thanks for joining, Clementine. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself, your sales motion? We'll get into your question here, man.
Yeah. So my name is Dalton. I'm an inside SDR manager over at Guru.
Love Guru.
Guru is a knowledge management platform, and kind of the way I describe it, it just helps from a sales rep or support rep or anyone in your job, just make it really easy to find information you need to just complete that. So whether you're working in Intercom, Slack, any application, you can find information that makes you do your job better. So my question, and then we have two kind of different selling motions, which is kind of leads to the question, right? So we have this definitely more of this enterprise sales motion, sales assisted with our bigger clients who want to like see demos and calls and kind of like, sales assisted. But then what we're really trying to scale right now is our self-serve / sales assisted model and our scalable kind of segment from one employee to 300. And my question was more for Zeb. So obviously we have tons of free accounts, we have trials, and I'm curious like what most excited you around or what infrastructures you put in place to help salespeople, understand who's ready to convert and how we actually speed up that process, right? So we've done a lot of things at Group. I was just curious, like from your point of view, what excited you the most that you built? What was your kind of philosophy? Who was working those kind of free leads, et cetera? So happy to give more context, but that's good.
I think I could talk about this question for 4 hours. So please make sure to cut me off before I do. So a couple of things that were really impactful here. The first one was actually basically the first project I did at Segment, which was inbound leads, responding to them, just engaging them. And basically we scored the inbound leads, which we hadn't done previously, and said, for anyone that's good, we're at least going to have an SDR send them 2 emails over the next couple of weeks, right? And the ones that want to talk to a sales rep and buy something, it's so much easier for them to do that. As part of that project, we also took the contact sales button and just made it bigger and on the front page of the website, which increased the number of sales requests we got from about 20 a week to about 50 a week, which just literally making it easier to find that thing. And that's still the highest performing channel of ARR for Segment. It's just that one button, and it was just like hidden on the website. So there's a few simple things like that. The fun stuff is kind of the later stuff that you'll work on, which is to me, the best framework I found for this is from Mad Kudu. Do you guys know them?
I was going to talk about them. You should, give a rundown.
Mad Kudu is a lead scoring platform. There's a couple things they do better than a lot of the other ones, but the breakthrough for me with their product is that they split lead scoring into 2 separate models and 2 separate components. So one of those models is the firmographic one or the demographic one, which is basically, does this person meet our ICP? So this is somebody at a tech company or a high growth company or a company in retail or whatever your ICP happens to be. And this person is director level or above, something like that, right? That's all the stuff that's kind of like a must have for lead scoring things. The thing that was really a breakthrough for me was the second model they built, which is the, do you remember what it's called, Pete?
Oh, I mean, PQL, product qualified lead.
It's basically PQL. It's basically the way that people engage, behavioral model. It's a behavioral model. So it looks at all the different touch points that people have with your product, with your website, with your sales team, whatever it is. And then it says, this person is ready to buy now. And when you
Yeah.
have a high end of like these free users, it's actually pretty easy to train a performant model there. And the combination of those two things lets you see which people and companies are good fits and which ones to talk to now. And what I think the deficiencies in kind of old ways of doing it are that people will squish these together. And so they'll basically lose the forest for the trees because they're looking at two totally separate things in the same place, or they won't look at the who's ready to talk now component of it. And they'll be talking to somebody who's a perfect fit, but if they just waited a month for that person to use the free product, they buy in a week. And instead they upset them because they reach out too early and the person doesn't want to engage with the sales rep. So I would highly recommend the product. And then that framework of behavioral and firmographic is just a really good way to think about lead scoring.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I think I remember having this conversation with like Culture Amp like 4 years ago or so, where in their case they didn't have a they had this really badass newsletter. It's called like People Geeks newsletter or whatever. It had like I think it had like 50,000 subscribers. It was like super dope. And I was like, oh, cool, that's really neat. Like, what are the data fields like on that? Oh, it's like first name, last name, and email address. I'm like, all right, cool. Like, let's just like shove that into Clearbit or People Data Labs and like see what their titles are. And they were like, wait, what? And I was like, yeah, there's like these magical things where we can take, because what ends up happening is marketers will be like, oh yeah, we want to make it as like low friction as possible to get this in. Or like, in you guys' case, it's probably product managers, like, oh, we want to make it low friction to get into the product. And you're like, okay, but I can't tell the difference between somebody who's like a student and somebody who's like the director of marketing operations, or I guess in you guys' case, like maybe, head of sales enablement at like some big ass company. So I think one thing you can do from like a lift standpoint is like go and take what you already have, depending on what the data model looks like right now. Go and take what you already have, enrich it, and then go shopping for gold, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. The next thing you can do is kind of related to what Zeb was talking about, from like making your inbound experience better. Oftentimes what ends up happening is marketers will be like, we want more MQLs, we want more MQLs, we want more MQLs. And then if we could literally just like, oh man, if we could just like add the CRM checkbox, right? So like in our case, Atrium requires an organization to have Salesforce and either Gmail or Office 365, right? We don't work with NetSuite, we don't work with HubSpot, et cetera, et cetera. And so like all of my content stuff historically, like I fell into this trap where I'm like, oh, we want the forms to be like, more like lower friction. And then at a certain point, I was just like, you know what, I'm just pissing away SDR time on stuff that's stupid and like annoying people. And so what I did was added title, and then moreover added like what is your interest, like AE management, SDR management, sales operations, and then qualified on email system and CRM system. And so then what I could do is I could do all this like fun forking information. So somebody comes in from a sick op, they are getting a very different treatment than somebody who's just like some rando SDR who like wanted to download like the one-on-one template or whatever. So that's something I would recommend that you guys think about, is like sometimes adding more fields can be really, really important. Now the next thing you can do is you can add fields but then have them enrich. So like Clearbit is really helpful in this regard, insofar as like if you have somebody put in an email address, it'll ping Clearbit, and then potentially what'll happen is Clearbit will like throw back the title, the company, et cetera. And so what you can have is like you actually are getting accurate data into your CRM or marketing automation platform, but you're not actually requiring the user to do it. So that's another thing you can consider as well. So this is about like net new leads. Essentially what you're doing is you're doing runtime on net new. What I was talking about in terms of like the lift of like of enriching your existing database. And then the last thing I might recommend here is, so we use this product called Chili Piper Concierge, which is super dope. So essentially what happens is if somebody meets criteria in the form, whether it's like them typing it in themselves or it like being a Clearbit, like bing, bing, meet enrichment criteria, it'll throw a calendar overlay in front of them and be like, cool, want to book? So literally what it is, it's like an automated inbound SDR in that regard, but like you don't, but you're making it such that you're not getting tire kickers onto rep calendars in that regard. So, I mean, those are the different things that you potentially could do there to kind of help you guys. given the fact that like Guru's been around the block, I would imagine there's probably a big treasure trove of like cool stuff that's in there already that you could probably do a pretty heavy enrichment lift on if somebody hasn't already done that to date.
Yeah, no, this was super helpful. I think like just to give you some, I think we have like we're working on the lead scoring. It's actually the PQL is actually some of the biggest things we've actually made a lot of strides on. Like we know kind of like the 4 things that someone needs to do in the product that is 4x conversion. I think like the next part is like what's the best way to actually what's the sales motion? Kind of the first question that we had with sides, like what's defining the sales motion, the handoffs when someone does hit a PQL, and then what is the touch points and things like that that we're trying to experiment and go with. So it's fun, but this is really helpful. I mean, even some of the button bigger is actually going to be helpful. I'm going to recommend that because
one thing I might add on that actually is just when you're talking about what the handoff is as well. The other thing too is, and I just chatted the chapter on inbound marketing from Founding Sales into the chat room. You can have an inbound from somebody who's not the right stakeholder. So you can have an inbound or a PQL be like, oh man, there's like some sales trainer is going ham creating content in Guru. Cool. We'll engage them and we'll go to the director of sales enablement.
Yeah.
This is oftentimes, so it's like qualify the account, don't necessarily qualify the lead, or it's like kind of do both. And that's something that sometimes that people miss. All right, cool. Dalton, that was a super fun question, man. Yeah. Okay. Have a great weekend. Later. Wonderful. So I think actually David Fox had a really delightful question here that I'm going to go ahead and grab him. Promote to panelist. David, are you there?
Unmute myself and turn my video on. How's it going, man?
Hey, buddy. How's it going?
Happy Friday.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you for joining us. So you have a really fun, this is like a true sales strategy question. You want to introduce yourself and your org and ask your question?
Absolutely. So David Fox, this is kind of a fractional CRO question. Talking with a CEO, it's a CEO founder sales role right now, or sales motion. Let's say 5 million run rate, Series A already established, don't have any salespeople. It's been all inbound, and I'm helping her in the initial stages of the setting up the process and kind of the go-to-market. But the question that I'm thinking more from a downstream is, okay, if we're focused on one vertical right now, obviously want to be a monopoly in that. And by the way, the play is, let's say it's analytics and it's a data lake play. And so they're focused on one industry right now. The question is, do you become the monopoly of this and just continue to take all the inbound, because it's all been inbound, and work that until it's exhausted? When do you overlay that with another vertical? Because there are, let's say, clearly 3 ICP that make a lot of sense. And the question is, when do you, how do you, what's the data science behind? As you scale out, you know, be mindful of CAC and all the other things as you hire sales reps and all of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 2 questions. One is, what's the average ASP? And 2 is, what's the like TAM of the initial vertical?
Yeah. Great. So ASP is, let's say, between 250 to 500K. It's an enterprise play. Yeah, no, I know.
I love that.
And it's funny because like I've run SMB, mid-market, and enterprise team. This is literally like, I mean, we could do $100 million deal kind of a scenario. So the sales cycles are long. They're very strategic, consultative, value-based, multi-threaded. And a lot of it is around relationships. So she's got these wonderful relationships established. She's got some very strong partners already. Google is a partner, for example. But yeah, does that give you enough, Zeb?
Yeah, and so basically you're saying that it seems like there must be a concern about the TAM of this initial vertical if you're already thinking about expanding at 5 million.
Well, okay, so that's a great question. I didn't answer the TAM. The TAM is, so domestically it's, so I'm under NDA, so I'm not sure. I mean, the TAM is large. Let's just say it focuses on state, local, and federal government. Yeah. So it's a public sector play. They're already doing things overseas as well. So, I mean, the TAM could be huge if you're thinking domestic plus international. And then the other plays could be, you know, for utilities and other regulators. So I don't have the actual TAM, but it's large, and so it wouldn't be
Seems like
like
it's big enough.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
You
wouldn't
don't feel like you're capped.
Thank you. So it's not like I'm going to be capped and I've got to figure out real quickly how do I get to that next one before I, you know,
Yeah.
exhaust the first initial ICP.
Zeb, do you have what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I feel like you're probably more of an expert on this, Pete, but I'll chime in briefly. So I think if you have a huge TAM and you have product market fit, which is what you're describing, if everything's coming inbound and you're closing those types of deals, I would just roll up that market and I would just focus on that and
Totally.
and think about, I would honestly probably think about expansion in your case at 10 times the size you're at or at 5 times the size with some sort of a tiger team. So basically for segment, we had retail, we had SaaS, and we had media companies. Those were the 3 enterprise verticals that we work really well in. And when we started to expand into other ones, we basically just had a couple of reps who honestly had come from a background where they sold into those verticals like financial services and wanted to go after them. We hadn't had success in financial services, but they took it on as like a side thing. And so I think the structure I would have is focus on the thing that works and just continue to crush it there. And then once you get to more scale where it would be reasonable to have a tiger team that's probably like a product manager, a couple of engineers, and then maybe 2 sales reps, spin that up and have it experiment with the vertical and be really willing to shut it down if after a year nothing's happening. Basically, there aren't the leading indicators that say this is going to be performant for us.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And I do like the way we're talking today of instead of just hiring 20 reps and let's go, let's be smart and let's kind of take baby steps and we prove it out. We've got the motion and now we can turn the volume up. So thanks for that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the way that I would think about this, here, let me go ahead and share my screen really quickly here. But you said that there's only one seller right now. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So like the whole key with startups is just like the first 3 rules of startups are focus. Right. And so what you want is like it sounds like you have a repeatable sales motion. In your case, it sounds like it was like founder led, which is good. And so now you're kind of taking that over. The thing you would want to do is just like, you know, add more reps at that point. And then the next thing after that, what we want to do is add more reps and that sales motion until we just to get to the, like, that's going to be hard enough to get repeatability on a human who is not you or a human who is not the founder. So that really should be the kind of the critical path right now. The other thing I would note is, you know, the siren song of like other stuff is like usually where startups get effed, right? Like LinkedIn, you know, LinkedIn was at like many hundreds of millions of dollars before they like had a second product line. So like different verticals, different segments, like there was a segment question earlier, different products, like, oh yeah, we'll get to $100 million by doing like 20 million ARR on 5 products. There are extraordinarily few organizations that do that. Even HubSpot, right? Like HubSpot now has like marketing automation platform, they got the CRM, they've got their service offering, and they got like their CMS. They're like a $15 billion market cap company, even before they like sales, they only started doing like 3 or 4 years ago, right? And so what you want to do is just like crush that initial, it's hard enough to get other humans to repeatedly sell something.
Yeah.
Versus like adding an incremental, like adding an incremental vertical where there might be like additional complexity. Now that being said, if there was scarcity, or if you do get inbound from other organizations, you can take them on like speculatively, Jesus, and then use the existing sales motion, right? Which is like, hey, cool, you're coming inbound, like I'm gonna hard qualify, I'm gonna sell you like I sell these other things. If you don't buy, we're not gonna make any promises to you from a product standpoint. We're not gonna like, you know, bend over backwards from a service standpoint, et cetera. Like, you know, any color you want as long as it's black, right here. And so that like, as in, don't kick them out of the inbound funnel necessarily if like they're big and their money is green, but don't necessarily like, you know, promise organizational resources there. Wonderful.
Thank you.
David?
And just and again, assuming that I was going to have the sales team and have that motion and all that, that was just the assumption. And I apologize for not putting that there. That's in the assumptive of we would do that, have a sales team, have that motion, do all that stuff. It was just, at what point do you do the other vertical And you pretty much answered that. So
Once,
thank
I mean, I think once you got a bunch of reps who are just like slamming, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Great to see you,
you.
David. Take care.
Yeah, good to see you, man. Thanks for everything. Cheers. Thanks, Zeb.
Bye. All right, cool. Well, I think that Hillary had a really great question here, so I'm going to go ahead and grab her. Boop. You there, Hillary?
Always on mute. What's up? Hey, how's it going? I'm Hillary Wilson. I'm head of sales for a small startup called Rabbit Analytics.
Okay.
The question is, we're bootstrapping. We're not going the VC route. I started a year and a half ago, and we were going to focus on small and mid-market for direct sales outreach. But when we really ramped up, what ended up happening as the downstream effect of our ICP is that we started getting a lot of inbound enterprise leads. So the software is fairly niche and sophisticated for the user, but it gets rolled out at full scale, and the like TCV is around $700,000 to $1 million. So like they're not small, but what's happening is we're roadblocking when we get to the vendor assessment phase because we're a 3-year-old company. So it doesn't matter like what our value prop is. It doesn't matter like how many like executive sponsors we get. We just continue to, we've gotten a couple of enterprise accounts. It's been successful. Like we've been able to stay like under the full scale budget in order to be able to get in and get that on our marquee. But for full scale rollouts, we're just not getting through that. So like, how do we get that big money?
Right. Got it. Zeb, you got a take on this?
Yeah, I mean, my main take on objections is the first objection is not usually the main objection. So there's this framework. It's LAER, listen, ask, I forget, explore, respond, something like that for objections. And just, or another one is thinking about all of the objections in the world and then what are the like crux of these. And so there's probably like what you're describing is to me either a risk objection or a lack of perceived value objection. It's probably one of those two things. And just doing as much work as you possibly can to like talk to these companies or talk to other companies that have run into the same thing and figure out what's actually the crux of their objection, I think would be really useful. Because it's hard to know based on what you described, like, is it really just that they have some sort of a like cutoff in their vendor assessment process, in which case, honestly, they probably shouldn't be in your ICP. You're probably selling to the wrong companies. Or is it something else? And how can you identify that real kind of underlying objection?
Yeah. I think that's a good, like, what's the objection under the objection thing? I think there's some pretty tactical things you could do to just handle that objection as well. Because I think, like, there are a lot of big companies that adopt advanced technology, mainly because like they need to get an edge on their competitors. And so I think oftentimes, this is maybe kind of to Zeb's point, you can, maybe the response to that is like a challenger sale a little bit. Like, well, I don't know about you guys are too small. Okay, cool. Well, like your competitor down the street is using it, so they're going to like eat your lunch, baby. In a very polite fashion, of course. So that's one thing that you can do there is like really get to the crux of the, now that might be the business user who's like, I know they're gonna eat my lunch. And then like IT might be like, we don't care, we're not KPI'd on that, la 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 la. So how you potentially deal with them might actually be actual like things like, are you SOC 2, do you have SOC 2 too?
I'm sorry?
Are you SOC 2 certified?
We are not.
Yeah, so there you go. Like, so I think there's a number of things you can do just to help with these folks. Like they just talk. So yeah, I think there's a number of things you can do in order to get your security game tighter. Like I'll tell you what we do at Atrium. So at Atrium, one of the first things that we did was we started having a bunch of people who would come to us and be like, what's your security situation? And oftentimes when organizations ask that, they literally have no idea what they're asking. They just want, like, they want some sort of answer like, oh yeah, we're secure. So what you need to do is like give them a totem that gives them comfort on like that your security is good. So one of the ways that we did that is we made a security white paper. It essentially was just the aggregation of all the answers for all these different security questionnaires. Then the next thing we did was actually one of my former sales reps at Talent Bin started a company called Security Pal. They do security reviews, like security form fills as a service. It's like one of my reps will get a security questionnaire from a prospect. We just flip it to Security Pal. They have our security posture documented, and they'll just turn it around in 24 hours. So essentially, you have an IT person who's like, "Oh, fill out this huge Excel document for me." They're never gonna come back. It's back in their inbox in 24 hours, and they're like, "Oh shit, I guess I have to approve this." So that's like another thing there. The other thing you can do too is, get your SOC 2 done. Great option to look at there is this company called Vanta, V-A-N-T-A, that makes for extraordinarily fast SOC 2 certification. Then the other thing you can do too is just like, raise your cybersecurity insurance, right? That can give organizations comfort as well. Oh, you're like this tiny little like nothing thing. Okay, cool. But like, look, we have $5 million of cyber or $10 million of cyber. So, because you're worried that like something bad happens to us and then like, something bad happens to you. Well, guess what? You'll get a $10 million check as a result. It's not on us. It's on, Prudential or whoever is like the insurance writer over here. And then there's potentially contractual things you can do as well. Like, oh, well, we don't want to put our infrastructure on you guys. And then if you guys go out of business and disappear, then, what happens? Oh, okay, cool. Well, we'll put in our contract that you can run an on-prem version of our software.
Okay.
Look, and I am not an attorney and I don't even play one on TV, but there are a variety of different mechanisms you can use in order to kind of address that. Sound good?
No, this is awesome. I really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
hey,
you bet.
Friday.
Back at you. Love your scarf. See you, Hillary.
See ya.
All right, we'll do our last question here. Coleman's got a good one. This is super Zebby. Promote to panelist. Coleman.
Hey Pete, how's it going? How are you guys?
Super awesome. Thank you for joining us. Coleman, can you introduce yourself and the company you work for and the sales motion? We can get into your question, please.
Yeah, happy to. So I work at Impact Tech, and essentially we're a B2B SaaS company that was kind of born out of affiliate marketing between like brand and publishers and the whole life cycle around partnerships. So kind of a niche space that's trying to expand into something larger. The company's about 500 people.
You work at Impact with like Eric and Marilyn and what have you?
Yeah, all of them. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, badass. Cool. All right. So, so what's your challenge right now?
I don't really have a challenge at any point. I just joined and, found this organization online and I've really enjoyed like being a part of the conversations and hearing everything that gets discussed here. And my question was, do either of you or both of you have like 3 pieces of advice for someone who's just coming into a sales ops role as a junior member? What would your top 3 pieces of advice be to kind of succeed and grow in the organization?
Nice. Zeb, you ran a sales ops. You went from being a rep to a sales ops person and then ran a sales ops org. What do you think?
And I hired a bunch of junior people, some of whom have been extremely successful. So I think that the things that I saw work really well, the first thing is a focus on projects that move the needle. So we came up with this internal thing we talk about a lot, which was like $1 million projects. It could be $500,000 project, it could be whatever it is, but just a lot of the sales ops work we're doing is like incremental. Maybe this will make one person 1% better. And if you move away from that, especially when you're in a more entry-level position, if you move away from that into like, what are the things that actually move the needle from the organization? You have the possibility of getting projects associated with you or things associated with you that deliver a ton of value to the executives of the organization. So some sort of like $1 million project or like what actually will make this company a ton of money. I would introduce that framework into how you prioritize the work you do. The other thing I would do is basically figure out a person that can help mentor you. The best person I had was this woman, Olga Narskaya, who joined Segment and was my boss for a long time, who was ex-consultant, ex-VP at Dropbox, amazing leader and teacher. And she taught me a ton of the operational stuff that I know now, like how to plan effectively, et cetera. And I had the fortune of her being my boss, but there's also tons of other amazing people, especially in this community, that would be willing to mentor on the side or provide input and can just help you deal with the more career question type things that you'll come across that don't naturally always come up in a like boss to employee relationship.
Yeah,
What do you
those are
think,
really
Pete?
good. I would say just be a voracious reader. You'd be shocked, man. Like, I forget who it was who was talking about this, but so one of the things that we do, because Atrium is like teaching the world how to be like, data-driven managers and data-driven sales managers, all my sales reps have to be extremely like expert when it comes to management by metric or what have you. So we actually have a learning curriculum. Got to read Cracking the Sales Management Code, got to read Transparency Sale, got to read Leading Sales Development by Jeremy Donovan. And then what ends up happening is like we talk to sales managers, sales leaders, they haven't read any of these things, right? And so like you can differentiate yourself in a huge way by just reading the very basic canon of these things. So like I mean sales reps can do it too, but certainly like so as a sales operations person, if you read like Cracking the Sales Management Code, the sales manager's survival guide. Oh, okay, delightful. Yeah. Cracking the Sales Management Code, the Sales Manager's Survival Guide, maybe the Revenue Acceleration Formula by Mark Roberge, maybe Fanatical
Challenger
Prospecting.
Sale.
Yeah, just like all these. There's not 20. There's like less than 10, and you will be just like head and shoulders above like a lot of your peers. And the other thing too, as a junior sales operations person, maybe this will be helpful. One of the things you're going to encounter as a junior sales ops person working with sales managers and sales leaders is you're going to feel like, mini, and like, well, this person's been doing sales for like 25 years. Like, what the hell could I like possibly know? Well, you'd actually be shocked, right? Like the more and more you can learn from other people, in the case of either books, or this is where things like modern sales are extraordinarily powerful, where you like if you're in modern sales and in the forum, even if you're not asking questions, you're just sitting as a fly on the wall and seeing other people ask questions and then getting the answers. You're just like passively learning. You end up learning so much more. This is what I tell my reps all the time because they're like, 28 or whatever. They're like, what do I know about this? I'm like, how many sales organizations have you interacted with in the last like 30 days? They're like, I don't know, like 20. Cool. How many organizations' data have you lit up and like and introspected and like done analysis on? They're like, I don't know, like 5 or 10. It's like, cool. How many sales organizations has that manager worked for in their life? 4, 6, whatever. I'm like, you in the last quarter, you've like. So I think the idea is like if you can just be as big of a sponge as possible and then be intentional about it, that'll be really, really powerful. And be intentional about your curriculum. There's a lot of like stupid bullshit on LinkedIn that's like super focused on like self-promotion and like bro poetry, right? And just like ignore that shit and focus in on the stuff that really is going to be powerful for you. I mean, because don't get me wrong, like LinkedIn's product management staff, like they're there to make you push on the little red dot, right, and get you coming back to create more ad inventory. But like if you create yourself a curriculum and make sure that you're in a good community of practice, and then have like a tight mentorship relationship, that'll set you totally up for success.
The last one, I should have said this before, but spend time with the best people on the frontline teams. So whoever your top 3 AEs are and your top 3 SDRs, like schedule a half hour and have them show you what their job is. Go to a demo where they pitch the product, and you buy credibility with the influencers in the organization, which is super valuable in the future. And you figure out like how the stuff you do actually, how the rubber meets the road. And so if you make a change to territories or something, you'll see what that implies for an SDR who like spends all their day looking at their territory list in Salesforce. So I think spending even 5 hours shadowing top performers is incredibly valuable.
Coleman, where are you coming from? Are you coming from a finance background or consulting background or a selling background?
Finance. So I did 2 years of investment banking and found my way into sales, kind of just interested in being a part of like growing an organization. Felt that was more what I was interested in.
Have you ever sold?
I've never like being a BDR or an AE and actually selling. I have not.
Okay, you're going to be one down there. So another thing you should read is Founding Sales. Because like it's just like exactly what Zeb is saying, where like it's gonna be hard for you to have credibility with like a manager or a leader. It's also gonna be hard for you to have credibility at a rep. Like, oh, forget you, number jockey. You never even like carried a bag. I'm not advocating for you to go and sell right now, but like establishing empathy and being forward about it. But like, look, I've never carried a bag, but what I read, when I was reading Cracking the Sales Management Code, or when I was on this demo with so and so, et cetera, then at least you can have a proxy for that. Sound good?
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, thank you guys so much. Very helpful.
Yeah, see you, man. Say hi to Eric and Marilyn. You have a great team there. It'll be super. You'll have a ton of fun. Okay.
Great. Will do. Thank you.
Okay. Later. All right, Zeb, we're done. You survive?
Awesome. Yeah. Worst hour of my life.
I don't know. I find it pretty fun. Wonderful. Well, everybody, thank you for coming. We'll go ahead. Like, this has been being recorded. We'll go ahead and send that out. It's going to be on YouTube later. All the sales strategy office hours are on YouTube and also in the historical show notes. You can subscribe on YouTube. And then for folks who aren't members of Modern Sales, you should definitely join, as we were just telling Coleman that he should get his act together and join there. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Okay. Thanks, Zeb. See you, man.
Ciao.
Bye.